There's a great study by Dr. Emma Werner, Kauai longitudinal study, amazing. This doctor looked at 600 plus babies from birth all the way until the day that they had passed. And she had other students that took on her work. I think the last pool was at 2019. But when you look at the different volumes of her stuff and you break it down to one thing, it's the acronym MAMA, MAMA. Every person, no matter how old, how young, they have to have one meaningful adult and one meaningful activity. And that in itself will like push forward this resilience that they don't know that's captivated inside of them.
Welcome to Richard Hawes' YouTube channel, which looks at what we can do today to make Hawaii Island a more sustainable place to live, so our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren won't be priced out of here and will be able to stay in Hawaii and live good lives here. Today is part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Tracey Wise. Last time, we talked about her work as president of the Pepe'ekeo Community Development Corporation, where she is spearheading some amazing things for that community. Go watch that. It's interesting. She's an interesting person. I will add a link to that video down in the description box below this video. Her other interest is youth, and Tracey works as a behavioral health supervisor at Kamehameha Schools Hawai. That's what we're going to talk to her about today, her work with children and mental health. So welcome, Tracey.
Hi, it's nice to see you guys again.
How's it, Tracey? It's good to see you.
So Tracey, tell us, how did you first get interested in working with kids and mental health?
Somewhere around my junior year of my undergraduate degree, I had to work during the summer, and I decided, why don't I put in for the special education teacher here at the time it was Waikowina School, K through second grade. The teacher was transferring the information to me, and she was saying, well, you got to work on this and you got to work on that, and this is where the deficit is, and this is the diagnosis. And I was like, diagnosis? Why would that even matter? Right? So I said, I'm going to let the kids teach me about them. And what I started realizing is, yes, there was diagnosis, and yes, they were built differently, especially differently, but it was relationship that made the difference. And then I started realizing, hey, some of these kids that are like antsy in their chairs, do they really eat breakfast in the morning? Started asking questions. My second grader at the time had a first and kindergarten brothers, and he said, Kumu, we leave the house too late to eat breakfast. I think as adults, we don't realize how impactful it is. Even if the child says, I'm not hungry, subconsciously, your mind is always going back to that space. Your brain, your heart, the rest of your body is, do I have enough nutrition to make it forward today? And so I realized we needed to do something because we live in our local culture. You have to be very careful to not offend parents and not make kids feel like their parents are doing wrong. And so I made it part of their activity, right? I would write their names out on a poster board and laminate it, and they would line it up with cereal, spell their name every morning as fine motor skills, and then we'd pour that all into a bowl, sit down, and everybody would eat breakfast together, including myself, to model to them that this was important. And then we started branching out to different types of foods. The impact was phenomenal. And what I mean phenomenal, I don't use that word lightly. The kumu that used to teach them during regular school came back after summer, so that's 6 weeks, came back after summer, and she's like, well, Tracey, like, thank you so much. Like, it was a good break for me. I really kind of needed that. And she goes, so let's go over the kids. And I can distinctly remember this one student that when we first started, they said that he could only do single digit multiplication. And that was difficult for him. This kid is now doing double digit multiplication, four digits to a single digit multiplication. And the teacher said, Tracey, I don't think that's possible. Like, did you observe him? And I said, I did. Why don't we test him right now? And so we get out the paper and pen. She gives him several like equations, and he just flew through it. And that's when I realized there's something that I could actually do to help. But then around, I think it was 2013, the mental health system was changing, and I was looking at all the trajectories: substance abuse, mental health, homelessness, incarceration, health problems, kidney disease, heart problems. And all of our native Hawaiian populations were holding those seats. And I was like, whoa, in our own land, why is that so? People say you can't train a dog new tricks. I don't totally believe that. I believe that if you have a relationship, a dog will go wherever you want it to go. But what I realize is if we want to impact a generation, we got to go back to the kids.
Tell me about your education. What did you study exactly once you realized this is the area you wanted to get into?
In undergraduate, I did psychology, sociology, Asian studies, religious studies. I was like all over the place. Then I went to do my certificate in teaching. Even after I did the certificate, I didn't go into teaching. Before I believe someone can be taught, you really need to take care of their well-being. You really need to look at like the foundational pieces. And so I then went into my master's in mental health counseling specialization. And then I went into my doctorate that looks at more the clinical aspects. And at the same time, studied for a doctorate in gerontology. So I want to know like the bandwidth. I want to know from kids to kupuna. If you can impact kids and you can watch them grow, they will be great kupuna. Kupuna in training, like we talked about. In this field, it's easy for people to say, oh, I'm sorry, that's out of your scope of service. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not trained to do that. Just like Richard, when there's a barrier, you figure out how you go through it, around it, above it, below it, whatever it takes to get to that goal. And the goal was, how can I impact a generation that will change how we see mental health? Because mental health is just a piece of the puzzle, but it's a very big piece.
And what's the answer to that? Do you have the answer? How do you impact a generation to improve, change mental health?
Have you guys ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
So Abraham Maslow, right, had foundational pieces, right? And the foundational pieces, and this is where I am today. I wasn't always here. I should tell you and Mr. Ha, I wasn't always here. I used to always think like, have the service available, open your office and people will come. Right. But then I realized, like, is that wellness or are we treating illness? How do we help a person be motivated, feel competent, feel activated enough to want to take on their own recovery? And that's when I realized, like, a lot of the people that I serve didn't feel like they had access to their own basic needs, that they could produce it for themselves. And that's when I realized, wait a minute. Yes, you need to create a safe place. And yes, you need to have relationships. But you also need to give them the ability to create for themselves, right? And it's especially it's food. It's especially when it comes to food.
So tell me about your job now as behavioral health supervisor at Kamehameha Schools. What does that entail?
In 2018, Kamehameha Schools made a very cognizant, very intentional decision to start our Malama Ola behavioral health team. At the time, there was 4 of us that was hired. We have a team of behavioral health specialists underneath us that will address if there's any like situations that require like more support. So we have academic counselors that will like help with your general supports. They'll do the education, they'll help with career counseling. And then we're the ones that deal with more like if there's any type of like depression risk, anxiety risk. Do we have to do referrals and linkages out to the community? A lot of looking at maybe topics of grief. And so our team over here at our Hawaii campus, there's a total of 5 of us. We work with kids on an ongoing basis in sort of like just support fashion. So we're not diagnosing kids. We do individual, we might do group, but it's to just help them access whatever part that will help that individual child like move forward.
That's so interesting. What an amazing resource for a school to provide to their kids. That's a little unusual, isn't it?
It is. Kamehameha Schools, I believe, is on the cutting edge of looking at the well-being of everyone that they come into contact with. When we talk about malama, we want to malama our students. We want to care for them, right? And not just care about grades, but care about that whole being, right? Because Kamehameha is one of the supporters of lifting the lahui, right? Lifting. Yeah, very different type of access to supports. But we realize that most of our students spend their time at the campus or with us. And so what can we do to help them, their ohana, and then the community, secondarily?
That's amazing. Also, it's a very different world now than when previous generations grew up. I'm thinking about the internet and cell phones and a lot of other things. It's a different world to navigate, I would think, and can be tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, post-COVID, I don't know that much people know this, but the Surgeon General, the Director of Health and Human Services at the federal level had said, we're in a mental health crisis when it comes to youth. right? We're riding a very big wave right now. There's not enough providers to the amount of people that need assistance. But at Kamehameha Schools, we're not looking at the diagnosis or the labeling. We're looking at how can we holistically help you. And if it's not us, or it's like this is not the space that the child wants to be seen at, then we're going to do whatever it takes to try and refer them to that place, because we want all of our kids to have that individual experience.
I'm very impressed hearing what Kamehameha has been doing. That's just amazing. What do we parents need to know about kids today and how they're doing, and what could we be doing to help them?
Oh, so we go back to that conversation about meaningful adult, meaningful activity. A lot of our students, not just at Kamehameha, across the board, a lot of our kids nowadays are definitely struggling is who are their meaningful adults? How do you access them? And when we say meaningful, I'm not saying we're talking to them. It's more about we're talking with them. I don't know what it is, but sometimes us as adults, we don't allow our kids to be the teachers. Having them teach changes perspectives about what they think about us as adults. It shows trust. And so that meaningful adult is someone that can be there in the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And it's not somebody that chooses to be there, but that the student actually lets in. So, like, do our kids have that? As parents, are we okay if it's not us? Have we built relationships with other adults so that we do trust our kids with them? Just think about when you guys were growing up. There was aunties and uncles or a neighbor that probably impacted your life. And how much access do our kids have to that now? That's one mana'o I would give to parents. I think another mana'o is the meaningful activity. Who is it meaningful to? Is it meaningful to the parents and the ohana because everybody did that? Everybody plays football. Everybody plays volleyball in our family versus maybe they want to go into performing arts and they're fantastic. And maybe they want to do ballet. Maybe they want to do ukulele. Maybe they want to do something else. And it's okay, right? It's better to do something else, go from childhood pursuits to something else, than to go to nothing at all. I think that is important, is them having that activity that doesn't feel like it's attached to a resume or to a college portfolio, but something that they really believe that can help them decompress. Guarantee, Richard, you getting your hands into the aina, getting it into the dirt, working out in the elements brings you peace. Whereas somebody else might be like, oh my God, that's so overwhelming, right? But for you, that's the meaningful activity, right? Yeah. I think the other thing, bullying is different nowadays. Instead of having the bully that is like constantly barraging you or physically hitting you or calling you names, we have what is called social bullying now, where you can have, these are friends that are not mindful that they're creating a bullying situation by carving out another friend. Maybe they're doing that in group chat. Maybe they're doing it on text messaging. Maybe they're putting up a picture that they all thought was funny on social media, but the person that it's pointing to didn't think it was funny. You know, parents always ask me, how, Tracey, how do I grow that relationship? I said, number one, be present and be consistent, be reliable, because they don't know what they don't know. They think they do. And some of them might be super smart and super eleu, but if you're consistent and present and you're willing to hear their voice and you're not willing to like talk all over them, they'll come into the space. That leads to that second layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is safety, security. And then the third one is belonging, making sure that they're a part of something. So,
Interesting you mentioned all that, because, when I was growing up, it was kind of like you stood a half a step back before you commit yourself to do something stupid, So,
yeah.
all my life, yeah. But then when I see how you interact with people, and especially the young people, there's value in that,
Yeah.
Are you optimistic about our children who are coming up now and how they're going to do?
Yeah, there's definitely portion of our students that I'm not worried about. Maybe when it comes to looking at them academically, the rest of the world might be worried about them, but I'm not worried about where they're going to go because you can see the servant leadership in them already. You can see that confidence, not arrogance, but confidence. Like I was speaking before, I think like some of them are like, they're kupuna in young bodies because if I just step back a little bit and watch them spin the dreams, whoa, they go way beyond what I was thinking. There's other students that we're going to have to malamado, people that we will have to provide more support, more mentorship. Another part that kind of like tugs at me, and it's not more about them, but it's more about how different things that they're faced with can affect their trajectory. So like, for example, like vaping, right? A lot of kids don't understand. There's a lot of chemicals in vaping. They don't understand that there's 2,000 compounds. They don't understand that there's 35 carcinogenic cancer forming stuff inside vaping, right? They don't understand that the devices that they're buying that they think smell good is actually targeting them as to be customers for life, right? And so my mindset is, how do I figure out what they're actually motivated for? Because I don't believe every kid wakes up in the morning and is like, I should go and vape today and pick up an addiction. I don't believe any kid does that. I believe either they don't want to be alone and so they end up using with somebody else. There's something that they're maladaptively coping with, so negatively coping, or they're bored. It's like nobody's asking them any of their mana'o to put forward. I am concerned about how external forces can affect their trajectory if there's not enough of us putting hope and belief into them.
You know, along the lines of what you just said, I don't know myself because I don't interact with the young folks, but I do have this optimistic feeling that they're smarter than people generally say, oh, they're lazy. They don't want to do this. And what I'm talking about is farming. I don't think a lot of folks want to get into farming because lose money. And so how do we make a situation that would allow them to get into farming and be successful and feel good inside?
Yeah, because I think that's the key, right? At the base of everybody, whether it's conscious or subconscious, everybody's worrying if there's going to be enough food. You can be the richest person on this island and it doesn't really matter. When there's no boats and there's no planes, nothing is coming in. The actual richest person is the person that can get their food, which is from the ocean, from the mountain, or they're growing it. I always tell the kids, everybody has value. You just have to figure out what is your value because that's what you're going to barter. Like for our kids here in Pepequil, a lot of them, they're not necessarily academically like sound, but hands, go to work, farm, grow something to eat, go and get fish, go and get boar, dress it, they got it. I feel like those practices cannot die out because if it does die out, what do our kids have left? You either have to get educated and make a very small percentage of what is going to be required to live here. You're either potentially gonna succumb to some kind of substance use, or there's always gonna be this sort of depression and anxiety and worry. Will I be able to provide? Which leads to mental health. But if you can teach them how to make food without dropping down all these dollar bills, I mean, we've got the best land in Big Island, the best conditions. What does farming, what does food sustainability have to do with this? It will build connections at the most basic foundation. If you can access food, you can trade food, you will always have connections. There's always something you can serve with.
It's so encouraging to meet somebody like Tracey who has that skill set. It feels like it's so basic. It almost feels like it's common sense, although it's not. I got to tell you, I want to thank you for what you do. And I'm so appreciative of being able to work with you. I cannot tell you.
Yeah, I enjoy it. It's so interesting because I was thinking to myself, like, I'm glad that I've been taking time in my life to grow. Because if I thought the final answer was only mental health, I wouldn't have grown enough to appreciate what we do, what the conversations, the kuka that we have going. Because I can go back and think, like, I wasn't even thinking at one point that it's down to the food, it's down to the water. That's where It is. If people want to look at the roots to all problems, it's there.
Yep.
I think our youth, our children are lucky to have you thinking this way and helping them this way.
Oh, thank you so much. They impact my life greatly too. I think everybody should get around kids and just be willing to learn. Be a student to the teacher. It's being present, like, and listening. We're part of their community. Like, I always think of them as, wow, these are going to be the people that are going to take care of me when I get older. So what can I do to let them know historically where we came from and listen to what they think is coming up next? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again today, Tracey. That was really interesting to hear about all these good works you're doing with our kupuna in training.
Yeah, kupuna in training.
Yeah,
that's
important.
true.
And thanks everyone for watching. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Richard Haas' blog. Ahui ho.